India Chipchase was born in 1995 in the city of Northampton, located in the United Kingdom. She grew up in an atmosphere of warmth and support from her large, close-knit family. As the eldest of two younger sisters and one brother, India always helped her mother take care of the little ones. Unfortunately, her parents divorced and her father moved to distant Australia. After successfully finishing school, India, following in the footsteps of her doctor father, decided to enroll in the medical program at college. However, during her studies, she began to have doubts about her choice of profession. In search of her true calling, the girl took a job working in bars and moved out from her parents' home. Despite this, her parents continued to support India, wanting her to be happy and engaged in something she loved. Eventually, India realized that she truly did want to become a doctor. Her parents were genuinely delighted by her choice, as they saw in her all the necessary qualities of a future excellent physician: intelligence, hard work, and caring. In her personal life, things were also going wonderfully for the girl. For several years, she had been dating Ivan Rayhan, a well-known rugby player whom she had known since school. However, a couple of months before the tragic events, the couple broke up but remained friends. India's attractive appearance drew the attention of many young men, which, as it later turned out, played a fatal role. 3 weeks ago, she met a charming dark-haired young man and they began dating. Her family considered him a decent guy and were sincerely happy for their daughter. On Friday, January 29, 2016, around 11:30 p.m., 20-year-old India went to the bar with her friends as usual. The group drank heavily and had fun. However, around 1 o'clock in the morning, her friends suddenly noticed India's absence. At first, they assumed she had gone to the restroom, but she wasn't there. A search of the bar also yielded no results. Then her companions decided that the girl must have gone home. Unfortunately, none of them tried to contact India. In the morning, her mother began calling her daughter, but she did not answer, which was completely unlike her. Usually, India was always reachable and maintained communication with her parents. The worried mother went to her daughter's apartment, but India wasn't there. Then the woman called the friends her daughter had been with at the bar the night before. But they replied that the last time they saw her was around 1 o'clock at night. The mother also contacted India's boyfriend. He said that that evening, he had been with other friends at a different bar. Because of the loud music, he did not hear or see the calls and messages from India. In the morning, seeing 9 missed calls and 2 messages from the girl, he tried to call her back, but she did not answer. The young man insisted that he did not know where India was. This caused great anxiety for the parents. They felt that something had happened to their daughter. The mother immediately reported her daughter's disappearance to the police. At first, law enforcement did not take the case seriously, assuming the girl may have stayed the night with one of her girlfriends. But after calling all of India's acquaintances, it became clear this was not the case. Meanwhile, the girl's family began spreading information about her disappearance on social media, hoping for a response from concerned citizens. India was officially declared missing. Detectives began the investigation by questioning the bar staff and reviewing surveillance camera footage. Employees confirmed that they remembered India well that night, as she was very drunk. Around 1 o'clock, the girl went outside for some fresh air, but the bouncer refused to let her back in due to her state of intoxication. India did not insist, only saying that she really wanted to go home. The manager walked her to a taxi and helped her get into the car. However, the driver, seeing the condition of the passenger, demanded payment for the ride up front. The offended India jumped out of the car. The manager was powerless to do anything and returned to work. The upset girl sat down near the bar, not knowing what to do next. She was texting and calling her boyfriend, but he did not answer. India even cried. The bar staff explained that every day they get many similar customers. They cannot help everyone and walk them home, so they did not intervene in the situation with the girl. According to the bouncer, after some time, a stranger approached India and started talking to her. It seemed as if they had known each other for a long time and got along well. The man assured the bouncer that he would deliver the girl home safely and soundly. Around 1:15 a.m., India left with him in a taxi. This was the last time the bar staff saw her. The police carefully studied the surveillance footage, which confirmed the staff's accounts. A photo of the stranger was shown to India's relatives and friends, but everyone stated that they were seeing this person for the first time and were sure that the girl did not know him. The situation looked extremely alarming. Investigators identified the taxi number that India left in with the mysterious stranger and contacted the driver. The taxi driver reported that initially, the man asked to be taken to McDonald's, but then changed the route and gave a different address located near a gas station. When they arrived at the place, the passenger got out of the car, asking to wait 5 minutes, to which the driver agreed. At that time, the girl was trying to call her boyfriend, but he still wasn't answering. As it turned out later, by that time his phone had run out of battery. India sent a few more nonsensical messages to her friends, but they also did not reply to her. The man, as promised, returned in about 5 minutes. He got into the car and asked the driver to take them to Stanley Road. India periodically passed out in the car. The taxi driver took them to the specified address around 1:40 a.m. The couple got out and went somewhere, and he left. The driver could not tell anything more about India. India did not show up for work that day, January 30th. Her shift started at 4 p.m., although she had never been late or missed work before. Her loved ones already understood that something had happened to her and prayed for her return home. The police again reviewed the surveillance camera footage and looked for clues. One of the detectives recognized the stranger who left with the girl. It was 52-year-old Edward Tenniswood. He had previously been convicted of assault and had recently been released from prison. Investigators began to study him. It turned out that in his youth, he had stolen a large sum of money from his father, and when his father found out about it, he disowned his son. Edward moved from London to Northampton and managed on his own. He could not count on help from his family, which is why he was a loner in life. Edward was described as a strange, eccentric man. He worked as an accountant, had never been married, and had no children. Acquaintances never saw him with friends or a girlfriend. For the last 5 years, Edward had been living in a rented apartment on Stanley Road. A neighbor said that Edward seemed like a modest, quiet man. Once he invited him to a bar to chat because he wanted to make friends. But instead, Edward got drunk and began behaving aggressively, and they had a big fight. The neighbor no longer communicated with him and considered him inadequate. Detectives were able to track India's location, and it turned out that she was in Edward's house on Stanley Road. There was enough evidence against him. The police obtained a warrant for the suspect's arrest. And literally a day after India's disappearance, at 3:45 p.m. on January 31st, they headed to his house. No one opened the door, so they had to break it down. Entering inside, the police were shocked by what they saw. On a mattress that was on the floor lay the girl's body, covered with a sheet. She was already dead. The bedding was covered in blood, and there was an injury on her head. In the living room stood a bottle of wine, with blood nearby. Edward was not at home. And it all looked very strange. The furniture in the apartment was covered with plastic wrap. On the floor were many newspapers, neatly and symmetrically laid out. Boxes contained many newspaper and magazine clippings with images of beautiful women. India's phone was found under the stairs. Her shoes and purse were neatly folded in the next room. Edward's neighbor said that she saw him at night with a young girl when they were approaching the house. The girl was very drunk and could barely walk, and Edward was helping her. She was surprised by what she saw. He had never brought girls home before. Investigators began to determine Edward's whereabouts. They tracked him using his bank card data. The suspect had checked into a hotel at 4 p.m. on January 30th. He paid for his stay with the card and stayed there overnight. Police arrived at the hotel around 7 p.m. on January 31st. Edward was sitting in the lobby, watching TV and drinking. He was arrested. Edward was surprised that the police had acted so quickly. He was charged with the murder of India. Edward had scratches on his hands and neck. These looked like defensive injuries inflicted on him by the victim. During interrogation at the police station, Edward told an incredible story about what happened that night. He was walking down the street and saw a girl crying near the bar. The man approached her. He could not pass by an upset girl. According to him, a connection arose between them. She smiled at him, trusted him. Edward promised to take her home. They got into a car and headed to the girl's place. Along the way, their feelings flared up even more and Edward invited her to his place. And India agreed. The taxi driver took them to the house and left. At home, the girl immediately went to the bathroom to freshen up. Meanwhile, he poured 2 glasses of wine. India came out in a good mood. They drank wine and laughed. At one point, she fell because she could barely stand on her feet and hit her head. The wound bled, but it was nothing serious. Then they laughed about it. The communication between them was going great, and then they had mutual consent. India asked him to choke her, and he fulfilled her request. The man tried to please her and choked the girl harder and harder, and she liked it. At one point, Edward got carried away and held his hands on her neck for too long, in his perception for about 10 seconds. The girl's body went into convulsions and India lost consciousness. Edward was drunk and did not realize that she had died. He fell asleep and slept with her body all night, not suspecting that she was dead. When Edward woke up the next morning and found that India was not breathing, he assumed she had had a stroke or a diabetes attack. The man tried to wake the girl, but to no avail. Instead of checking her pulse, he poured himself a glass of wine. By his own admission, Edward realized that something was wrong, but did not want to be upset by it. After finishing the wine, he decided to change India's clothes so that she would look decent. After that, the man went for a walk, intending to clear his head and get something to eat. Edward was sure that during his absence, the girl would come to her senses and everything would be fine. However, despite his indignation and the wine he drank, his anxiety only grew. To calm down, the man decided to rent a hotel room. There he drank and tried to think positively. In his own words, Edward considered himself one of the world's greatest optimists. As it turned out, while at the hotel, he closely followed the investigation's progress on television. Edward hoped that the police would come to his home and not find India there. And then it would turn out that after he left, she woke up and went home alive and unharmed. Then he would just laugh about this story. However, no one believed his version. The police were convinced that Edward had deliberately lured the drunk and vulnerable girl to his apartment with a single purpose. Edward explained why his furniture was wrapped in plastic wrap. He suffered from obsessive-compulsive disorder and had a morbid fear of dirt and dust. The man even refused to have carpets in his home, considering them dust collectors. To avoid contamination, he constantly wore latex gloves. Regarding the photographs of attractive women cut out from newspapers, Edward claimed that he had previously dated these girls. Most of the pictures were of the famous model Heather Stewart, with whom the man was literally obsessed. According to him, they had dated in the late 80s, early 90s, until the girl moved to New York. However, investigators doubted the truthfulness of these statements, and not without reason. Heather herself denied any relationship with Edward and did not even know him. The woman expressed her sadness at being involuntarily involved in the murder and her condolences to the family of the deceased. Police suggested that perhaps, upon meeting India at the bar, Edward decided to take advantage of her resemblance to Heather and her vulnerable state, seeing the girl as easy prey. The autopsy showed that India's death occurred around 3 o'clock in the morning. The cause was not only strangulation, but also a head injury from a blunt object. According to the pathologist, the girl could not have accidentally received such an injury from a fall, after which she allegedly sat and laughed. It was a fatal injury. In addition, more than 50 bruises, cuts and scratches were found on India's body, as if she had been brutally beaten. Experts doubted that all these injuries could also be the result of an accident. A toxicological examination revealed the presence of alcohol in the girl's blood at a concentration 3 times the norm. Edward's DNA was found under India's nails. All these facts contradicted the suspect's version of consensual sex. The trial of Edward began in July 2016. India's parents refused to be present in the courtroom, as they could not bear the gruesome details of their daughter's murder. The lawyers tried to portray the defendant exclusively in a positive light, as a modest, quiet and calm man who was praised at work. Edward and his defenders insisted on the accidental nature of the girl's death during intimate contact by mutual consent. However, the prosecutors refuted this version. The nature of the victim's injuries indicated violence. The prosecution put forward the assumption that, once in Edward's house, India refused to have relations with him, which infuriated him. The enraged man squeezed her neck until the girl lost consciousness, after which he began to. At some point, India regained consciousness and, finding the attacker on top of her, began to fight back. In response, Edward probably hit her on the head with a bottle, which led to her death. In court, 2 witnesses testified on behalf of the prosecution, shedding light on Edward's dark past. One of them, a neighbor, once drank with the defendant in a bar. Then Edward told him that in the army he had learned to kill with his bare hands and had developed post-traumatic stress disorder. The neighbor also shared his own experience of communicating with Edward. Once, when drunk, he became inadequate, flew into a rage, attacked the neighbor and broke his arm. After that, Edward began to strangle the victim, and he already thought that he would kill him. Frightened by this incident, the man ceased all contact with his dangerous neighbor. Another witness told how, as a teenager, she became a victim of an attack by Edward. He grabbed her, began to strangle her, and then tried to. Fortunately, the girl managed to break free and escape. At that time, she did not dare to report it to the police, but this attack traumatized her forever and destroyed her trust in men. When she saw the face of the accused in India's case on television, she recognized him and came to the police station to give her testimony. This testimony played an important role in the trial, allowing the jury to see the true face of the modest accountant who turned into a monster. The defendant himself denied the witnesses' statements. The prosecutor drew attention to the fact that Edward deliberately told the taxi driver the address at the end of the street so that he would not see which house they were heading to. This was part of his criminal plan, which means that at that moment the murder was already premeditated. In the end, the jury found Edward guilty and sentenced him to life imprisonment with the right to parole after 30 years, that is, at the age of 82. The judge, announcing the verdict, called this crime horrible, committed by the defendant in order to satisfy his perverted sexual fantasies with an attractive young girl. The judge had no doubt that Edward, being very persuasive, managed to convince the drunk and stunned India to go with him, promising her safety. Once in the house, he took advantage of her helpless state and inability to resist due to severe intoxication. Once behind bars, Edward began complaining to his lawyer about cruel treatment and beatings by other inmates. He claimed to be vulnerable and in danger. Despite numerous appeals, they were all rejected. Thank you for watching this story. Write your thoughts about it in the comments. Don't miss the future videos, subscribe and like the channel. Take care of yourself and people you love.